In the shadows of a forgotten excavation site, archaeologists were working in silence when their shovels struck something unusual. A sealed stone box encased in layers of hardened earth. It wasn't just any ordinary artifact, the kind found in abundance at archaeological sites. There was something strange about the way the box withstood the test of time, as if it had been made to survive millennia without crumbling. The silence turned to murmurs when the heavy lid was removed. Inside lay a manuscript wrapped in darkened cloth, still intact despite its incalculable age. The eyes of those present met in disbelief. This seemed to belong neither to the ordinary world nor to a previously known culture. At first glance, the manuscript exuded mystery. Its pages were not papyrus, leather, or any other material known from antiquity. The initial touch revealed a surface that was both rigid and flexible, as if made of plant fibers combined with something metallic. The engraved symbols didn't resemble any traditional alphabet, but seemed to be arranged in precise lines, as if written by hands trained in a lost language. Each symbol shimmered in the lantern light, reflecting in golden and bluish hues that no archaeologist could explain. The feeling was that the text somehow pulsed with a life of its own, as if it held a secret that had been waiting centuries to be revealed. The atmosphere was tense. This wasn't just another archaeological discovery. It felt like a message left on purpose, as if whoever wrote it knew that one day, far beyond their time, someone would find those words. The team leader hesitated to touch the manuscript, and for a few seconds, there was absolute silence. Everyone sensed they were not looking at an ordinary relic, but something that could alter the understanding of human history. After all, a document so well preserved, so carefully hidden, couldn't be the work of chance. There was intention, there was secrecy, and perhaps there was power. Early reports from the site described the atmosphere as unsettling. Some claimed that upon opening the box, they felt a sudden chill, as if the room had lost its vital energy. Others swore they heard a distant echo, similar to an ancient whisper coming from nowhere. Scientific evidence? Perhaps not. But everyone present, without exception, realized that the discovery carried a different weight, as if the manuscript carried not just words, but a hidden pact between the ages. And the question that hung in the air, almost like an unspoken warning, was simple and disturbing. What was really written there? If it were just another historical record, why had it been buried in secret, protected by layers of stone and earth, as if too dangerous to surface? The manuscript seemed to beckon, to demand attention, and at the same time to repel those who dared approach. With each passing second, the certainty grew that opening those pages meant crossing an invisible border, a threshold between human knowledge and the unfathomable. And that border, once crossed, could never be erased. The site of the discovery was no ordinary abandoned ruin, but rather a remote territory where, according to ancient accounts, entire civilizations flourished and disappeared without leaving a clear trace. The excavation was taking place in a region of the Middle East surrounded by arid deserts, where the wind often covers secrets with sand for centuries. There, among rocks and fragments of collapsed temples, the box containing the manuscript emerged. At first, researchers believed they were looking at just another ordinary religious record, similar to so many others found in archaeological sites. But its presumed age and enigmatic inscriptions quickly challenged this assumption. Initial analyses indicated that the manuscript was older than any known biblical text, even older than the first Sumerian tablets. If confirmed, it would mean that the origin of human writing could have been influenced by previously unknown forces or knowledge. The cloth covering the document was subjected to immediate dating tests. The result left archaeologists stunned, over 6,000 years old. And yet, the material showed no signs of natural decomposition. No insects, no fungi, nor the expected wear and tear of time. It was as if it had been protected by a chemical or spiritual secret. Scientists wondered, what civilization could have had access to this type of technique? The question was all the more vexing because no official records from that time pointed to anything similar. Suddenly, the manuscript was no longer just an archaeological piece and became a threat to the established historical consensus. The inscribed symbols also raised questions. On some pages, Traces of ancient languages such as Proto-Kunya and certain archaic Egyptian characters could be recognized, but they appeared mixed with completely unfamiliar signs. It was as if someone had created their own language, a hybrid that condensed several cultures. This detail was what most intrigued linguists. How could peoples who, officially, never had contact with each other be represented in the same text? The manuscript seemed to be a bridge between distinct civilizations, as if written by a hand that crossed cultural and temporal boundaries. As the document was analyzed in laboratories, rumors began to spread. Some suggested that the location of the discovery coincided with areas mentioned in apocryphal texts as scenes of alliances between gods and men. Others claimed that the symbols resembled ceremonial pacts, something akin to contracts of obedience in exchange of power. This caused discomfort among religious institutions, which preferred not to speak publicly until more clarity was obtained. The mere possibility that a pre-biblical manuscript spoke of divine pacts shook the foundations of what was believed to be the spiritual origin of humanity. For the archaeologists present, however, the impact was more immediate and practical. They knew they were facing a discovery that could change not only science, but the collective perception of all human history. The manuscript was not only ancient, it was unacceptably advanced for its time, as if it had been deposited there by hands that knew more than they should have. And most unsettling was the feeling that this would not be the only revelation. What lay hidden within those pages could yet shake centuries of belief and established knowledge. When the manuscript was finally removed from its stone case and carefully placed on the analysis table, everyone immediately realized it was no ordinary object. The texture of the material surprised even the most experienced expert. It wasn't papyrus, leather, clay, or parchment. To the touch, it felt like an unlikely fusion of plant fibers and metallic particles, something that defied both science and history. No process known in antiquity could explain the near-perfect preservation of those pages. The surface glowed in the light, emitting golden and bluish reflections that gave the impression the engraved symbols were alive, pulsating as if carrying their own energy. It was impossible not to feel that this document held something beyond mere writing. The inscriptions, in turn, were even more enigmatic. In neat, symmetrical lines, the symbols followed an order that suggested logic, but did not belong to any catalogued language. Some characters resembled cuneiform, others had curves similar to Egyptian hieroglyphics, while certain signs evoked primitive Norse runes. This impossible combination of cultures and eras left linguists feeling as if they were faced with a unique puzzle. It was as if the manuscript had been written in a lost universal language, understandable only by those who participated in its creation. The mixture of styles suggested a deliberate intention to unify different codes into a single text, preserving something that should span generations without losing its essence. Beyond the words, the pages contained drawings and visual marks that aroused even more unease. In several places, humanoid figures with wings appeared, depicted alongside ordinary men, as if both shared the same space and the same agreement. In another section, a circle was divided into 4 equal parts, with celestial symbols in each quadrant, suggesting pacts linked to the forces of nature: air, fire, water, and earth. Some scholars interpreted these images as representations of divine alliances, a kind of contract between humans and beings who presented themselves as gods. Others saw them merely as religious metaphors, created to convey teachings through symbols. But all agreed on one thing: they had never seen anything like it. The most disturbing detail, however, was the presence of signatures. At the end of certain passages, seal-like marks appeared, as if they were signatures of those ratifying the pacts described. Some resembled open hands, others contained complex geometric symbols. Most intriguingly, in some cases, these seals were embossed, as if burned into the material by intense heat. The technology required to produce this effect on something so ancient seemed simply non-existent for the period in which the manuscript was created. As the experts carefully leafed through each page, an air of reverence pervaded the room. There was a sense that they were not merely studying an ancient document, but invading a sacred space. Many avoided even touching the manuscript directly, wearing thick gloves, as if mere contact might represent a transgression. What was most striking was the message the object itself seemed to convey. It was not meant to be easily found. It was destined to remain hidden until a specific time arrived. And now, against all odds, that time had arrived. When the first passages of the manuscript were translated, scholars realized they were not dealing with simple religious hymns or mythological records. The words revealed something much more direct and disturbing. Clear descriptions of pacts established between men and entities that presented themselves as gods. These were neither metaphors nor parables. The text spoke of commitments made, obligations assumed, and guarantees offered in exchange for something that surpassed human comprehension. The translators felt as if they were reading a formal contract, but written in symbolic and solemn language. Each line seemed to carry the weight of an eternal promise. The manuscript described how entire communities gathered in nocturnal ceremonies under the starry sky to forge alliances with these beings. Humans offered sacrifices, not only of animals, but also of entire crops, rare metals, and even their own firstborn descendants. In return, the gods, or those who identified themselves as such, granted protection from catastrophes, abundant harvests, and victories in war. It was an exchange, a relationship of dependence that transformed humans into obedient subjects. The word oath was repeated countless times, reinforcing the idea that these agreements could not be broken without severe punishment. In one of the most striking passages, the text stated, "As long as man offers his life and his faith, we will maintain the order of heaven and earth. Whoever breaks the covenant will be cast into the abyss of no return." This phrase, translated with difficulty, left the translators silent. It was not merely a symbolic account, it was a threatening clause, typical of contracts in which one party held absolute power over the other. The presence of embossed seals at the end of this passage reinforced the idea that the gods signed the document alongside mankind, cementing the covenant as something real and unbreakable. The symbols also conveyed references to hierarchy. Some pacts were made in the name of a celestial council, while others directly mentioned singular entities, described as Lords of Fire, Guardians of Light, and Shadow Bearers. The division between light and darkness was clear, but curiously, there was no moral judgment. The manuscript did not portray the gods of shadow as evil, nor those of light as beneficent. Both demanded devotion and surrender. Both granted favors in exchange for submission. This neutrality disturbed scholars, accustomed to religious narratives in which good and evil are opposed. Here, the message was different: power and control, without moral distinction. Some experts saw this as the origin of the first organized religions. Others went even further. They suggested that these were not gods in the spiritual sense, but beings who could have manipulated entire peoples through advanced knowledge. The manuscript, in this case, would be proof of a millennia-old dominion based on written pacts. Regardless of the interpretation, one thing was certain: these texts challenged humanity's traditional view of its spiritual roots. And even more disturbing, they conveyed the sense that such agreements were not entirely over, but waiting to be revived in the not-so-distant future. The revelation of the manuscript's contents quickly spread throughout academic and religious circles, and what was supposed to be merely an archaeological analysis quickly became an ideological battleground. For the scientists involved, the discovery represented an unprecedented opportunity, a document capable of rewriting the history of civilization, offering clues to the beliefs and rituals of previously uncatalogued peoples. But for religious leaders, the mere possibility that pacts with gods had been written before any known sacred texts posed a direct threat to the authority of their doctrines. For them, the manuscript was not an archaeological gem, but a thorn in the side of established faith. The initial public debates were marked by shock and hostility. Theological experts claimed the document was nothing more than a hoax, perhaps created by some group aiming to discredit ancient religious traditions. Archaeologists, however, defended the find's authenticity, highlighting the dating tests and chemical analyses that proved its antiquity. Tensions increased when newspapers began publishing translated excerpts, fueling the popular imagination. Headlines spoke of contracts with the gods, dark agreements, and even evidence of divine manipulation. With each new release, more questions arose, and the answers remained unclear. Beyond the ideological clash, there was also a practical conflict. Academic and religious institutions began pressuring those responsible for the excavation to suspend the studies. Universities feared losing funding if they became involved in something considered heretical, while local authorities saw it as a political danger, capable of inflaming religious debates in a region already marked by historical disputes. The manuscript, which was supposed to be merely an object of study, had become a threat to stability. The translators themselves felt the weight of responsibility. Some abandoned the work after receiving veiled threats. Others reported recurring nightmares, as if the text were exerting influence over them. Some swore they saw symbols glow in the night, as if the manuscript were trying to defend itself from being revealed. Rumors, perhaps. But amid an already tense environment, every strange detail was amplified. The team was divided. One part wanted to move forward at any cost, while another argued that certain lines should remain hidden. The greatest conflict, however, was invisible. It was in the heart of everyone who read those pages. If the manuscript were genuine, it meant that humanity had been born under the yoke of pacts with entities whose nature was still uncertain. This called into question not only traditional faith, but also the very autonomy of the human species. Had we been guided, manipulated, or even controlled by higher forces from the very beginning? This was the question no one dared answer aloud, but one that loomed large over everyone involved. And so, amidst the shock, dispute, and fear, the manuscript ceased to be merely an object found in excavations and became a veiled threat to the balance between science, religion, and power. It was as if the ancient pages, silent in their indecipherable language, continued to sow discord thousands of years after they were written. As studies progressed, scientific analyses of the manuscript only served to deepen the enigma rather than provide definitive answers. Each test revealed something that shouldn't have been possible, as if the object deliberately defied human knowledge. The first shock came with the carbon dating. The fragments of fibers and fabrics surrounding the manuscript indicated it was over 6,000 years old. This would already be enough to place it among humanity's oldest documents, but the real surprise was that the material remained intact, as if preserved by some unknown method, immune to the ravages of time. There were no signs of natural decomposition, no traces of microorganisms. It was as if the manuscript had traversed the millennia in an untouchable capsule. The team decided to delve deeper into the analysis, and that's when the results became even more disconcerting. Examination of the ink revealed substances that didn't match any known composition from the time. Metallic particles were identified in its composition, including alloys that shouldn't have existed in such remote periods of history. How could ancient people have synthesized materials that, theoretically, would only be possible with modern technology? This question loomed large in the laboratories, leaving experts without a plausible explanation. Some even suggested that the manuscript could have been tampered with in more recent times, but the uniformity of wear on the fabrics and inscriptions contradicted this hypothesis. Everything pointed to a genuine, unexplained origin. Another disturbing discovery came during examinations under ultraviolet light. Certain sections of the manuscript emitted a faint glow, revealing symbols hidden between the visible lines. These extra symbols were not part of the main script, but appeared to be secret markings, like additional codes or seals inserted almost invisibly. When photographed and digitally analyzed, they revealed complex geometric patterns, similar to mandalas or star structures. Scholars were unable to determine whether they served an aesthetic, ritualistic, or scientific purpose, but the fact that they were deliberately hidden suggested that the text contained layers of meaning intended only for a select few. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate among team members. Some reported feeling dizzy or uncomfortable when standing too close to the manuscript. Others claimed to have strange dreams, always involving winged figures or apocalyptic scenarios. Officially, none of this was recorded in the reports, but in the laboratory corridors, the feeling was that the object possessed an almost living presence. It was as if the manuscript resisted decipherment, punishing those who dared push the limits of its understanding. Each new result increased the tension. For science, admitting the document's authenticity meant accepting that ancient peoples had access to knowledge impossible for their time. For religion, It meant confronting the idea that divine pacts could have been recorded before the official writings. And for the researchers themselves, it meant dealing with the anguish of an enigma that seemed to mock their attempts at explanation. Instead of answers, the manuscript offered only more mystery. And this escalation of contradictions, increasingly disturbing, paved the way for the revelation to come. After weeks of exhaustive analysis and fragmentary translations, one of the team's linguists managed to decipher a longer section of the manuscript. It was a central section, carefully marked with highlighting symbols, as if it were the core of the text. The room in the laboratory fell into absolute silence as the words began to be read softly, slowly, each sentence weighing like a blow. The text read, "We swear to keep man in light and shadow until the last seal is broken. The earth will tremble when the pact is broken, and those who have not chosen sides will be consumed by the void." Those phrases didn't sound like mythology or poetic metaphor. They were a direct warning, a solemnly engraved promise, as if describing not only the past, but also an inevitable future. The manuscript didn't speak of pacts already concluded, but of an agreement still in force, which would only end when this last seal was broken. The translation left scholars astonished. For some, it was a clear reference to apocalyptic prophecies found in various religious traditions. For others, it was proof that different cultures had drawn inspiration from the same ancient source, now materialized in this impossible document. Most disturbing was the repeated appearance of the expression light and shadow in later passages, suggesting that humanity had been kept in a kind of controlled duality, manipulated by forces that presented themselves as divine. There was no struggle between good and evil, as we often imagine, but rather an imposed balance, a power play in which humans were merely pieces on the board. This profoundly shook the traditional view of religions, which had always placed humanity at the center of creation or as the protagonist of its own spiritual history. There, the manuscript made it clear: humanity commanded nothing. It merely obeyed. Realizing the significance of this revelation, some members of the team refused to continue translating. Some argued that continuing meant defying forces that should not be disturbed. Others, however, were fascinated, convinced that the manuscript could hold the key to understanding why so many distant cultures shared similar myths about floods, angry gods, and final judgments. The last seal seemed to be the common thread, a promise of destruction and renewal that spanned millennia and religions. The psychological impact was immediate. Religious leaders who had partial access to the contents reacted with silence or indignation, fearing that public disclosure would shake the faith of millions. Scientists, in turn, were torn between the obligation to reveal their discoveries and the fear of the consequences. The manuscript was no longer just an archaeological piece. It became a detonator, a trigger capable of exploding convictions and power structures consolidated for centuries. The atmosphere of mystery turned into almost unbearable tension. The feeling among everyone involved was the same. That text should never have been found. And yet, there it was, revealing secrets that were perhaps too great for man to bear. The climax was set. The manuscript not only spoke of the past, but also foretold a future yet to come. The partial release of the translated excerpt came as a bombshell. As soon as journalists gained access to the last seal phrase, the news spread around the world within hours. Dramatic headlines appeared on websites and newspapers. Ancient manuscript speaks of a divine pact still active. Forgotten prophecy threatens science and faith. What was once confined to a circle of academics began to occupy the popular imagination, fueling conspiracy theories, heated religious debates, and a widespread fear that something terrible was about to happen. The manuscript, once kept secret, had become a symbol of global distrust and unrest. Religious institutions reacted cautiously, but the discomfort was evident. Some authorities preferred to downplay the discovery, classifying it as a mere misinterpreted archaeological piece. Others were more aggressive. They called the text heresy, a fraud, and an attempt to sow spiritual chaos. But the silence of certain leaders, who refused to comment, was interpreted by many as a sign that the revelation was more serious than previously acknowledged. Meanwhile, independent preachers and cult leaders began using the manuscript as proof of their own doctrines, claiming it confirmed what they had been preaching for years. Within academia, the divide was equally profound. Some scholars insisted on validating the material's authenticity, pointing out that all dating and composition tests disproved the idea of forgery. Others, however, maintained that it was too dangerous to release to the public. Internal reports began to circulate advocating that certain passages be kept secret until the context was fully understood. But it was too late. The flame was already lit, and containing the blaze would be nearly impossible. Governments also began to get involved. The manuscript, now stored in high-security vaults, became the target of political disputes. Nations with strong religious beliefs feared popular uprisings if the complete translation were to become public. In some countries, authorities even banned publications on the subject, classifying them as a threat to public order. Rumors even emerged that the document could be confiscated by military forces under the pretext of preserving national security. Meanwhile, on social media, people reacted with panic, curiosity, and fascination. Some believed they were faced with concrete proof that the end of times was near. Others saw the discovery as confirmation of contact with extraterrestrial civilizations that at some distant moment had manipulated humanity. Viral videos spoke of prophecies, conspiracies, and secrets kept by global elites. The manuscript had become more than an archaeological object. It was a catalyst for fears and beliefs, capable of reshaping the way millions of people interpreted the world. Inside the laboratories, however, the atmosphere was different. Researchers began to face pressure to end their studies. Reports of unexpected visits, gag orders, and confidentiality agreements multiplied. With each new translation, the fear grew that the information would never reach the public. The manuscript, which promised to illuminate the origins of humanity, now risked being locked away forever in some inaccessible repository. The greatest consequence, paradoxically, was this. The more was discovered, the more powerful those who wanted to keep the truth buried grew. Despite the worldwide commotion and pressure from all sides, the fact is that the manuscript remained largely indecipherable. Only fragments had been reliably translated, and even these had already sent shockwaves through scientists, religious figures, and governments. But the majority of the document remained a mystery. Overlapping symbols, lines that seemed to move in certain lights, and passages where the writing dissolved into incomprehensible geometric shapes. It was as if the manuscript had been deliberately written to conceal rather than reveal, keeping its essence only for those who possessed the correct key to reading it. The translators encountered passages that, even after hours of analysis, seemed to elude human reasoning. Some terms appeared repeatedly, such as the abyss of no return, the seals that bind, and the guardians of the border. However, without full context, it was impossible to determine whether these were metaphors, instructions, or literal descriptions of something that had existed in the past. Most intriguingly, certain words, when compared with different ancient languages, showed unlikely similarities to languages that, officially, would only emerge thousands of years later. This suggested an even more obscure origin, a script that had served as a matrix for other linguistic systems, but had never been recorded in official history. For archaeologists, this detail was a torment. How could one explain that a manuscript supposedly created over 6,000 years ago would contain elements of languages that would only be used much later? Was it a case of linguistic coincidence, or proof that the text had been created by an intelligence that transcended eras and borders? With each new hypothesis, the mystery only deepened, as if the document itself mocked the attempts at explanation. Furthermore, many pages were illegible, eroded by marks that didn't appear to be the natural result of the passage of time. In some passages, it was as if symbols had been intentionally erased, leaving empty spaces in place of crucial words. This detail led some scholars to believe that the manuscript had undergone revisions over the centuries, possibly to hide parts deemed too dangerous. The question that remained unanswered was, who had made these changes, and for what purpose? If the Pacts described had truly existed, had anyone attempted to eliminate clues to their continuity? The academic community, divided, oscillated between curiosity and fear. The public in turn fueled their imagination even more strongly, convinced that the hidden parts held devastating prophecies, secrets of extraterrestrial origin, or spiritual revelations capable of shaking all religions. But amidst so many interpretations, one certainty remained. The manuscript continued to defy human logic, and each page that resisted translation was like a silent reminder that the essential was still hidden, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Thus, the enigma remained open. The manuscript, with its indestructible appearance and impossible language, offered no definitive answers, but left a trail of endless questions. The greatest of these was the one that echoed among scientists and believers, archaeologists, and the curious. What if humanity were unprepared to know the truth that those pages still concealed? The manuscript, even partially translated, had already fulfilled its purpose, opening an irreversible wound in the way humanity views its own history. It wasn't just a matter of archaeology or theology. It was an uncomfortable mirror before which everyone needed to confront themselves. After all, if the Pacts described were true, it would mean that human beings have never walked alone, that from the beginning of time, they have been subject to forces that presented themselves as divine, and that perhaps still act in the shadows. The idea of free will, so defended by cultures and religions, was tainted by the possibility of a greater, invisible agreement, sustaining the course of civilization. But the lack of definitive answers only heightened the impact. The document remained shrouded in official silence, kept in inaccessible vaults, protected by interests that went beyond science. And each layer of secrecy added even more weight to the mystery. The public yearned for revelations, but received only fragments. And it is in this void that the most disturbing questions arise. Why hide so much? If the manuscript were merely an archaeological curiosity, shouldn't it be displayed to the world in museums? The fact that it was locked away in laboratories and vaults fueled suspicion that its contents were too dangerous to reveal in full. At the same time, science itself faced a dilemma. Confirming the manuscript's complete authenticity meant admitting that technologies and languages existed in times when, officially, humankind was still struggling for survival. Denying its authenticity, on the other hand, seemed impossible given the material evidence already presented. Thus, the text became a kind of frontier, a limit between what we can understand and what we perhaps should never know. And then, the inevitable question arises: was the manuscript truly found by chance? Or was it destined to emerge precisely at this time, at a moment when humanity is questioning its beliefs, its leaders, and its certainties? Perhaps those pages were not just a record of the past, but a warning for the present. Perhaps they speak not of pacts already ended, but of alliances still awaiting renewal. In the end, what remains is an uncomfortable silence, laden with possibilities. A document that challenges history, provokes faith, and casts shadows over science. The ancient manuscript provides no answers. It merely shifts our gaze, forcing humanity to acknowledge that its narrative may be incomplete. And like every true mystery, its strength lies precisely in what it does not reveal. And you, faced with this story, what do you believe? Were these pacts merely symbols of a forgotten civilization? Or are they fragments of a greater truth hidden beyond time? We may never know for sure, but one thing is inevitable. After seeing this manuscript, no one will be able to look at the history of humanity the same way.